20 takes. Let's get this right. Michigan 13th Circuit Court Judge Kevin Elsenheimer heard a court case brought by William Bailey. The lawsuit was about an unofficial hourly result error with Biden winning when he wasn't. This was found to be caused by a Republican clerk's error updating the ballot information website for Antietam County, where Trump won by 37,000 votes in a population of 23,000. Since it was asked and answered and the court case should have been over with, and actually this information was provided without him having to have a court case, the lawyer involved decided to use this as a propaganda point, or not, and began the meme of flipping votes, or not. The judge ordered 22 tabulators frozen, or some judge somewhere. And some judge somewhere allowed for forensic imaging, not just photos, due to a closely decided village proposal to allow a marijuana dispensary, not really about the original complaint. The Trump supporter attorney gave interviews while there was an order not to discuss this outwardly, and did all sorts of inaccurate, incomplete, or misleading assertions, again, propaganda. The judge then permitted public release of this same lawyer's 23-page report that, if you read it and you're not a pro-Trump person, is designed to erode nothing else but public confidence in our voting system and lying about the subject matter, but basing it on Allied Security Operations Group's claim of expertise in this area of analyzing data on a computer. This is the same group that confused voting districts in Minnesota with Michigan and back again. They're not the sharpest hammer in the shed, and the information they provided, the raw information that 23-page synopsis was based on, wasn't necessarily released easily to the public. There was some resistance. And because the judge allowed all the chicanery and bullshit to happen, it was legitimate that the state, the county, and other individuals, as well as the Democratic Party, could demand that group of idiots in a clown car have to release the raw data. Now, what we have right now is a 23-page report. So I'm going to be using that data. But let's get this straight. This is a 23-person county. Trump won in. The basis for bringing a court case angrily isn't that he won, is that originally there was a discrepancy, which was caused by a Republican typing something on a file or maybe even a web page. So there's not really a basis to look at this case. But the effect it had was to lock down some machinery, which was intelligent. I actually agree with that. And to do a real analysis that's referred to as a forensic imaging. What that means is you clone the hard drive, the entire hard drive. If you load the operating system, then the programs, and then it creates a little sliver of data, you don't just copy this much. A forensic imaging is you take the entire hard drive and copy it, because the computer's, while it's running, is making files and erasing them as it goes, or changing the file size. And sometimes it'll just erase things and start all over from the beginning. So you have to have all the blanked area. Now, on a normal hard drive, you could, like let's say an electromechanical hard drive with a magnetic surface and heads that move, you could write the operating system, the programs, and then the data, then erase the whole thing by just telling it to overwrite the data with all zeros, which wears out the drive a bit. Or just tell the operating system to go away and just say, list yourself as blank. Then you can load the operating system, the programs, and then the data. Simple. Which means it would overwrite the same area probably. Which is the reason you can get away with that, as being a way to erase your machine a lot of the time, and most of the data is erased. But there's all this area out here, and there's a temporary folder that can be anywhere, that sort of thing. Now, on an old-style electromechanical drive, you want to erase it by writing zeros to it. Now, newer solid-state drives operate a bit differently. In order to truly wipe them, you need to use a built-in utility that's burned into it to tell it to overwrite itself from beginning to end with zeros. You can do other combos, but most of them don't want to do that. You really just want to write it once because they're very sensitive to rewrites. And They're so sensitive that the drive's default behavior, which is encouraged, is that if you write an operating system, your programs, and your data, it'll look like that. And if you tell it to erase itself by saying you're just erased, you didn't do a full erase, you're just making space available, it'll look blank. And when you write to it, it'll write the operating system here, then the programs, and then the data. Which means the old copy is still sitting there to be recovered. It's very hard to erase one of these unless you use that special utility that's built into the hardware of the drive. Some of you didn't know that until you just heard me say it, and I guarantee you can double check it with any geek unless he's an idiot. That means ignoring somebody specific in Delaware, I'm assuming. So anyway, y'all know what happened, right? Let's talk about another characteristic of voting and the vote tabulators, which are scanners, mechanical counters, feed mechanisms that are hooked up to a computer that has a server somewhere that does collating for each of them so that dozens of people can work and one machine can act as a server, and they might use a mesh network where they keep copies of each other's information. Do you believe that they used an electromechanical drive, which means that if you quick erased it, you just write the operating system back where it was? Or would it be a solid-state modern hard drive that's faster, that you're not supposed to rewrite too many times? That if you operating system to it, and software and data, and then erased it to do it again for some reason I'm going to bring up, that it would write it over here instead of over here. So you'd keep doing it, so you'd have backup copies in various locations that would not be able to be erased unless you went way out of your way to get rid of them. Again, it's based on not wearing out the drive, even by using it. So which drive do you think they used, and do you think that they went to the trouble of gov wiping the drive? But why would they need to wipe it? The rules say that they have to make equipment that's extremely reliable, almost no error rate within the computer's behavior for counting votes, for tabulating. And then the machinery itself should be tested to see if it has a failure rate and reduce the failures to 0 if possible. As long as it doesn't affect the election, it's okay if it's not a 0% failure rate, depending on what you're talking about. The quote you see people typing up is that the rules say that it has to have a 0% failure rate almost. Now, the thing you looked up is that these Dominion, they're always using Dominion, it could be a different piece of equipment. The Dominion tabulators had a 68% failure rate, almost exactly, suspiciously a perfectly round number. And what was brought up was specific wording used, like specific lines or events. And if you read the information, it mentions that were configuration errors. And it also says that they were labeled critical error warnings or something like that. Is that indicating that the ballots had an error, or the computer had an error, or that this was part of a test run done a month beforehand where they told the machines it's election day by simulating an election by feeding it paper ballots that are done by printing them out so they look perfect, others that are printed out with some errors, and others that are done the same thing with photocopying so they look faded, and another set that might have been crumpled or folded? Did anybody look up the manual on how to test this? So anyway, let's say you were doing a test like that, and you wanted to prove the machines could detect errors. Would you create ballots that were all perfect, or create a bunch of ballots that had some errors with it too? Would you keep it to a certain percentage? Did you make it to where you could easily detect it by using specific numbers or something? Did you know that the joke about the next door neighbor of the beast is that his address is 667? It's not an accurate way to do it, but it's kind of a funny joke. What are the other numbers of the beast that are used as jokes in the computer and industry? 666, 667, 676, and 766. Very commonly used. It's like typing out in hexadecimal. Dead beef, DEADBEF, is actually something you type in hexadecimal, or BOOBs, which B00B is boob, and 5 for boobs. People, you do know that computer geeks make jokes. So the numbers that are quoted in this bullshit file lists the following number of errors: 10,667 out of 15,676, 15,676. So numerologically here, there should be 10,766 somewhere else in the file. That's for you to go look up. Now, that could have been a test string from a previous install of an operating system with the software for doing the vote, and then the data files that didn't get erased because then they wiped it because they have to, and they have to quick wipe it because they don't want to wear out the drive. Load the operating system, the voting software, and then the data from the real vote. They did a verbatim, perfect forensic image of this drive, and unless they know to look carefully, they might have looked at the first part of the hard drive trying to find the data. Now, that could be actual votes, right? But they didn't say those were votes that were in error or error occurrences from reading the ballots. The ballot tabulator software doesn't load this information in the Windows event log. It's loaded in a file for errors or ballot results. It'll have some special name. It'll be part of a database. But what is WAPTEC talking about? They talked about finding error logs, and they said they were specifically labeled critical, warning, or error messages. They left out the word message. It's a critical message, an error message, or a warning message. There's also information messages. Information messages are successful actions. Warning messages are events that occurred that might become a problem. An error message is a significant problem, and a critical message is a severe problem. They used wording that says that they were looking at the Windows event log. Now, yes, the operating system shouldn't have any errors that are significant or important, but I don't know if you can make a Windows computer have 0% errors at all, because the programs can start in a batch, and then they can run into each other, and then stop and restart repeatedly. They create errors because they're out of sync. I mean, you can fix it, but it's not required for starting up the fucking mouse on a machine where you're not using a mouse most of the time. It's okay if it goes through errors as long as they work themselves out. Errors that do not complete successfully, that's an actual thing, is the important thing. Sync problems happen on computers. They're using Windows, and on Linux it's the same thing. But an error event specifically uses the words critical, error, and warning. And they said these were lines or events. In the event log, each line contains one message. And they can be either critical or error or warning type. A technical person would look this up. I had to go look this up to make sure I wasn't wrong about this. But the report done by the lawyer called them critical warnings and, configuration errors and stuff. The configuration error complaints, the majority of them. How would you have a configuration error in the form of a paper ballot read? You can't. You also can't have a critical error warning as a line or an event in the event viewer because they're all separate things. They can't be on the same... Well, I guess you could put them on the same line, I suppose. But that doesn't happen normally. If you do a test of the operating system non-destructively to make sure it works correctly, what you might do is do a simple one. Remove the configuration files, which they mentioned, which are regenerated if the software is written correctly. It'll bring up an error by run program. I can't find my configuration file, exiting without a configuration file. Then it'll restart, make a new one, and say there was an error. And then on the next one, it'll start up normally and exit normally without any message in the middle except status messages. To review, idiots who can't tell the difference between Minnesota and Michigan fucked up looking at the error log instead of looking at how many ballots might have been screwed up. It wasn't 66% or 68% exactly of the error messages caused by ballot reads. It was probably because they were testing to make sure the operating system worked correctly when you remove the config files and reset it back to normal so you can start over again. And then erase it. They probably recovered a file from a previous install, which they're required to do to prove it works. Good day, good luck, goodbye.